Thanks for dropping by and welcome to the first tutorial of 2023. Doesn't time fly? This year I'm going to be doing some long form tutorials and going through some explanation of everything I'm doing. I'm building packs this season, so I'm going to record me building the packs, and I'm also going to include the mistakes I make and where it just doesn't work out. And I'm doing that so we can see there's the problem, how did we come up with a solution. Also, I'm going to be showing you some of the Easter eggs that are inside, particularly Fusion. I'm going to be making picture-in-picture templates. We'll start basic, and that means I'm going to make an effect. So you drop that onto a clip or an adjustment clip or a compound clip, and we'll have some controls and presets inside the inspector. And throughout this year, I'll do a lot of work in the inspector using the code. So where a lot of the other YouTube channels will show you how to build things, and then you make a macro, and then that's it, done, I'm going to go one stage extra to show you even more. One thing I'm going to start off is grabbing some media. I'm going to go back to the edit page. I'm going to grab the media pool, and in the media pool here I've got my bins. These are my default bins. There'll be a link in the description for these bins if you want them. I'm going to import some media. I'm going to import this chap, the background on this chap, and I'm going to select open. I'm going to build this based on media, but you don't have to. You can base it on an adjustment clip. So let me explain that. If we go into the effects library and we grab an adjustment clip and bring it down to the timeline and then go into Fusion, we've got two nodes. The media in node comes from the timeline, so that's on the cut and the edit page, and brings that timeline into Fusion. The media out takes whatever we've done with it and sends it back to the timeline, both on the cut page and on the edit page. Everything we do with this line in the middle, this yellow line, is the effect. And then we can save that effect out as a macro to send it to our friends, to reuse it over and over again. And sometimes we want it slightly different to use it over and over again. And that's what I'll be showing you as we go forward. I'll do lots of presets, lots of versioning, and we'll really use all the tools inside DaVinci Resolve, particularly Fusion. And then you can see how they work. The disadvantage of using an adjustment clip is I can't see what's going on really in the viewer. If I bring in a shape, bring in a render, and shapes now, I would recommend always use S shapes. What you can now see in the viewer is the mask, and if I come into the merge and I come to operator and change that to mask, what you'll now see is the checkered background, which would be transparent on the edit and cut page, and the black here is the mask. So whatever we drop this on, this is where the video will be, inside this black shape. And the reason I'm using this shape is because we can change its shape. You know, why have a round S-cam in the bottom corner of your screen when you're doing tutorials? You can have any shape. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to start really simple, building a new sort of webcam window or tutorial window like the window I'm in now. If I just come back into here and lift that up one track and grab some media, what you'll see now is this is what we've got. But what I like to do is to actually not do any of that, is to actually use video or a still, but video's easy. So I brought in this headshot. I'm going to change the duration to 5 seconds. This is irrelevant. You don't need to do this. It doesn't matter. We're going to be using anim curves for any animation we do. So we're not going to worry about keyframes. It's going to be responsive. You can send it anywhere and it'll work. With the headshot, what I want to do is make it a Fusion clip. Now in these tutorials, I'm going to use the context menu as much as possible, but you will see I've got keyboard shortcuts for when I'm not recording tutorials to speed up my workflow. So we're going to make it a new Fusion clip, and then I'm going to right click again and open on the Fusion page. I get exactly the same node tree. I've got my media in and my media out, but I've got some video which I can see. I'll bring those nodes in again. I'm going to cough, so I'll cough, but I'll turn the audio down. So I'll bring in the same things, come into the inspector, change the operator to mask, and now I've got this video that I can see. And why have I done that? Well, the main reason I've done that is because when I'm building this, I'm going to call it S-cam for shape camera. I'm going to bring in a transform node, and I'm going to drop it on here. Also, throughout the tutorials, I'm going to try and use nodes that are only in the free version. If you've got the studio, it works. If you've got the free, it works as well. That's the plan. With this transform, if I come into the inspector, what it means is I'm now controlling the video before the mask. So we could flip the video, we could then make it a little bit smaller, we could then reposition in there. By having video on the screen, I can now adjust everything to get a good default first. Let's just reset the video. Another thing that I'm going to do is take another transform. Now this is our Simon Stansfield hotbar. In fact, I'll show you a hotbar trick in a second. I'll bring this down to this end, and what this does is move everything. So I've got a transform here that will move the mask, so I could reposition the mask. In fact, if I do 0.85, 0.2 and then make that 0.4, we've got this mask down here in the corner. But this transform moves what's inside the mask. So I've got lots of control with a couple of nodes. In a video I watched quite a while ago, I think it might have been over a year ago now, this is the Simon Stansfield hotbar. You can do a lot with this. This isn't actually the default. If I put it back to default, that's what most people see. But it's here. It's just underneath the viewers and it's above the graph, which is great because it's easy to drag things down. But if you're working on dual monitors or you've got a different monitor setup, this might be a little annoying, so you might not want to use this. And this is an Easter egg that's inside Fusion. I know the keyboard shortcut works on Windows, but you have to have a Reactor plugin for it to work on Mac, I believe. So I'm on Windows and I'm going to show you this little Easter egg. First thing I'm going to do is remove this toolbar. If you want the toolbar removed by default, Andrew Hazelden has a script. I think it's a config file rather than a script, that as soon as you come into Fusion will turn this off. But if you come into the Fusion menu at the top, you've got show toolbar, and I've given it a shortcut of Control Alt and T. I can either use that or do Control Alt and T on my keyboard to move it. Thanks, John. That's not an Easter egg. No. But this is, if you hold, well, I'm sure you know, if you hold the shift and the space bar, we get the select tool menu. But that's not the only menu you can have. If you hold the control shift and space bar, you'll get a select action menu. I haven't gone through all this menu. It's basically everything that's inside the folders of DaVinci Resolve and Fusion, with a few caveats. We're going to type in tool for toolbar here, and you'll see here we've got customize toolbars. If we select this, we now get this panel, which I believe in Mac you have to go through the I think it's the hotkey menu. Let's have a look. Tools, hotkey manager. So you need from Reactor the hotkey manager. There is a shortcut to bring up hotkey manager. I'll dig that out and I'll put that into the description. But here we're just dealing with the customized toolbar. I can add a new toolbar and I'm going to give it a shape. I'm going to give it a name and I'm going to call it S-Shapes. So this is going to be the toolbar when I work with S-Shapes, and you can have as many of these as you want. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to come to here and I'm going to select shapes and I'm going to add all. You don't have to add all. You can jump around and just add any tool you want to this toolbar. And you may have noticed at the top of the screen, I've now got another toolbar. If we come to here to the end, we can grab hold of it and we can pull it out and put it anywhere. It's a floating toolbar. It'll go on the sides. So this toolbar, it can come down here. So I can have toolbars all over the place. The downside with this toolbar is it's not persistent. What happens is once you save your project, you restart DaVinci Resolve, it's not there anymore. If anybody from Blackmagic is watching, can you make this persistent? So if I put it into this project, it stays in this project. Okay, let's get back on track. So we're down here now and we've got our nodes in place. I'm going to be working on media. With my S-Cam, what I want is a nice border around it. So how am I going to create a border really easily? Well, something inside DaVinci Resolve Fusion that is super powerful, I really think this should be your first go-to, are node instances. And a node instance is an exact copy. So if we come to our node here and copy it, and then underneath we do paste instance, this is an exact copy of the node. But it's not just an exact copy of the node, it shares the cache of that node. So what this means is there's only one node caching, but you've got twice as many controls. They are connected together by default, but you can disconnect them. You can de-instance these nodes. Now, because I'm using S-Shapes, I need a render because it's an S-shape. So there's my render. I'm going to bring that down here and it creates a merge. Now what you can see on screen is the two masks. This mask is covering the first mask. So if I come into the instance, and what I need to do is to disconnect, de-instance some of these controls. So the first one is solid because I don't want it to be solid, so we de-instance that. The next one is border width because I want it to be a border. I'm also going to be disconnecting 2 other controls, but I need to turn off solid first for the controls to appear. Throughout this season, I will show you how to do this, to hide controls and have controls appear when you need them and disappear when you don't need them. It's a bit of a rabbit hole really, because once you get a control that disappears, you can't adjust that control, so you'll need to put an expression on it so that control goes to a default when it's not visible. Bit more complicated than it looks like. To make them disappear is actually quite easy. I was quite surprised. Now, position and length, I'm going to de-instance position and length because I'm going to animate them. I'm going to put anim curves on them, and we need to give it a width. So there we go. So I've now got a border. That border is connected to my original node. So if I go back to my original node and I change the sides, then the border changes as well because it's the same controls, it's the same node. I'm going to come back into here, reset that. I'm going to come back into here, reset that, and then we can see it better in the middle. But by default, I'll probably have it in this bottom corner. Back after a quick cough and a coffee break. What else do I need? I've got my border, and I want that border to be animated. So what I want to do as well, I want to change the color of the border. So we go in here. In fact, let's rename this. Let's rename them. I've very nearly used my keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to rename this. This is going to be main mask. You'll notice I'm using camel case, and this is just because I'm a web developer. I recommend you come up with your own naming convention, and then that way, when you build things out and you reuse them over and over again, it just becomes really simple and second nature. Main mask is my main mask in my shape, and here I'm going to have this as S border. Yeah, we'll have it as S border, and then I know this is my border. The green line indicates that it's an instance, so it's connected to that there. You can turn that off if you want. And here in the border node, I'm going to come to where it says style, and these are the colors. This green box around the parameters tells me it's connected to its instance, to its parent node. So I'm going to come to where it says red, right click, and I'm going to de-instance the whole color group. Going to do it all in one go, and now it's not connected. So I can change the color of the border without affecting the color of the mask. And the reason I've done that is because if I had the mask, for example, a mid-grey, it's going to affect the image that's in the mask. So now I've got a colour on the border. Let's make this a little bit better. I'm going to bring in an S transform, and I'm going to put it on here. There's several ways of bringing nodes in. You can highlight the main node and just click this once and it'll put it on there. So this transform is actually going to be changing the width and the height of my shape, so I get more shapes. Also, I've got rotation on here. It's not connected. There we go. So let's just reset that. So rotation rotates the mask but not the border, and that changes the shape X and Y but not the border. So what do we need to do? We need to make an instance of this transform. So we're going to copy it and then we're going to paste it as an instance. I need to connect it to here, so you can click on this and we can just do that with the pipes. Also, you can right click, so if we grab this but use the right mouse button, when we come over here and let go, it will show us what inputs are available. And on a transform there's only one. From here to here there's only one. So now this is an instance. So this is an instance of this transform. Whatever we do now with that transform affects the border and the mask, and then we can change the shape even further. So we've got lots of options here about having this S transform here. Just set these to default. I could do with renaming them as well. I'll think about that in a minute. Next thing I'm going to do is add a shadow, and I'm just going to use, in this case I need to use the shift and space bar to bring up my select tool. I'm going to select the basic shadow because I want it to work in the free version. Now shadows are really difficult, but I do know a good shadow is 0.493 on the Y, and here about, I think it's 0.015, I think. Let's have a look. We'll jump back into here. Can't see a shadow because we need a clip underneath it. So we've got a shadow. The controls will be available in the back row, and adjust it. So let's jump back into Fusion. Once we've got our shadow set up, I'm going to put in some animation. Just tidy these up a little bit. Now I always have a couple of nodes in most comps, and this one here we're going to call position, and this is going to be a global position. This will move everything. This is going to be my media, so I'm just going to rename this media XF. This can be renamed to mask XF. This is going to be my I, for instance, mask XF. One of the reasons for renaming the nodes is for when I build the macro and when I'm working in the code, I know what this is inside the code, rather than guessing, oh, what is transform 1_1 or what is transform 1_2. I've actually named them so I know. But if you want to have a look at what the node is, just hold down Shift, Control and press E and you'll see the original nodes. And one thing when I press Control, Shift and E there, if you look at right at the beginning, you'll notice it's not showing as an instance, and that's because it's just a duplicate node and all the cache is coming from the original node, which is great. I need to go and make another coffee shortly. Now I'm going to add some animation in here. I'm going to have an intro animation and an outro animation. What I've discovered is if you use the video transitions on a lot of effect, they can do the animation for you. It takes all the legwork out, it saves duplicating things. But I wanted to show you a little trick with dissolve nodes, something that originally we'd use an expression for. You don't need to. Let's bring in a transform there, and we're going to bring in a transform here, and these are going to be me animation nodes. What I tend to do is use transforms for animation because it's separate from the original node, so I can give the controls of the original node to the end user, and anything I do is in here. So this is going to be my anim intro, and then here this is going to be my anim outro, and all I'm going to do with these is I'm going to use size, but I need to connect them up. And you might be thinking, why have I got them up here? And this is because I'm going to have my dissolves here, and I'll show you that shortly. I'm just going to set these up first. So I'm going to come into the anim intro node, and in the inspector I'm going to do animation on size, and I'm going to use anim curves. So if I right click, I can come down to modify with anim curves. However, I use anim curves a lot, so if I come down to the RAM meter at the bottom and double click on it, it opens my Fusion settings. I can then come to default, and what you'll see up here is default animation. You will probably have nothing in there. Because I work with anim curves a lot, I can just change that to anim curves, and you can do any one of these. Anything with a number, I'm going to have anim curves, and I'm going to save that out. All that means, it saves me a fraction of a second. If I come to size, animate, I've now got that modifier already on. I don't need to do going through 2 layers of menu. So in the modifier, this is the anim curves, super powerful. I'm going to change this to duration because it's not a transition. I'm going to make it easing, and I'm going to make it elastic when it comes in, not when it starts, when it finishes. The scale is going to be, if it's going to finish on 1 and it's going to start on 0. So with the scaling, the scale here is what it's going to end on, and the offset is where it's going to start. However, there's a caveat, you have to add them together. So if we wanted it to be start at 0.5 but end at 1, you'd have to have the offset at 0.5, so that's where it's going to start, and then we're going to add 0.5 on top of it, making a total of 1. So that means the animation would go from 0.5 to 1, and because we've got the elastic curve on it, that's our little bounce. But I want this to go from 0, so from nothing to 1, and we're going to have it a bit faster. I'm going to make it 3, and then this bounces in. With the animation outro, I'm going to do exactly the same, but I'm going to delay and invert. So I've now done the intro, I'm going to do the outro. So I'm going to come to the animate outro, come up to the inspector and size, right click and animate. That's going to put my modifier on, come into modifiers. I'm going to change the source to duration because it's not a transition. I'm going to change the curve to easing, and then I can put the elastic on, but I want the elastic to be at the beginning of the transition. So I'm going to do here, elastic. I'm going to invert the transition because I want it to work backwards. And then here I'm going to have 1 to 0. Speed is going to be 3, and I need to delay this, and I'm going to delay it by 0.6. This time offset is 0.6 is 60% the length of the comp. The animation is going to start. So that should now give me, I might have to render, I might have to cache this. Now I've got my intro, and then 60% down the timeline, I've got my outro. Take the loop off. Now that's great, and what I can do is change these controls to switch it off so there's no animation, but I want to do that a little bit differently. I want to give a checkbox to the end user so the end user can turn it off. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do shift and space, I'm going to type in dissolve and bring in a dissolve node. I don't want it connected, I want it here. I'm going to duplicate that, so I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it here. So I've got 2 now. This one we're going to rename, and this is going to be SW1 for switch 1. This one's going to be SW2 for switch 2. And then I'm going to disconnect this, but I'm going to take from here to here, then from there to there, from here to here, from there to there, and to there, and then this goes there. And what this is doing is my flow of my media comes in here. This switch, it either goes through the switch or it doesn't go through the switch. So it goes both ways. And if the switch is, so this is the foreground. If it's set to foreground, it gives me my animation. If it's set to background, it'll just pass it through. And then the same with this one. If I come here and I turn this to foreground, there's no animation passing through this switch, but there is an outro animation because it's not passing through this switch. If I come here, then now there's no animation at all, not even rendering. So now we could use tick boxes, check boxes to switch these either way. So we've got animation or no animation. I'm going to have it as default as no animation, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into this switch. I'm going to right click and I'm going to edit control. Now normally, or in the past, we used to add a control of a checkbox and then we do an expression that says if the checkbox is tick, have it foreground, if it's not ticked, have it background. And we don't need to do that. The name of this control is mix, and if I just press tab, then it comes up background, foreground. I want it in controls, and all I'm going to do, I want it off by default. I want it to be an integer, so a whole number, and then I want it to be a checkbox. And now that control changes to a checkbox, and I can just check it or uncheck it. The way I got that, if we come into SW2, if I hover over the background, foreground, in the bottom left, you'll see that the node is SW2 and the control, or the control is mix. So again, come down here, right click, edit controls. In here, I'm going to type in mix, press tab. I want it on the controls page, default of 0, integer, whole number, and a checkbox. So now, rather than having that extra layer of an expression, I've just got a checkbox to turn that on and off. We've now got our animation here, but I want to put an animation onto the border. So if I come into the border and then come into the inspector, we've got the position and length. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put the modifier, which is anim curves, on position and length. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to make this duration, easing, sign. However, what I'm going to do, I want it to start complete. I want it to finish off screen. And if we looked at that, so now I've got my border animating on there. But what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to set this to 0, so there's no animation. And what I need it to be on all the time. I've got here the modifier added, but it's not in use. It's just there, which I can use later as a preset. The position, that just moves the border starts and ends. So I'm going to do exactly the same with this. I'm just going to set it up and set that to 0. And now I've got my controls available, but I'm not going to use them until I build the macro. Next up, and I believe this is new for 18-ish, if you come into the viewer, now normally you can press Control and G, but if we right click, we've got guides, and we can show guides, which is Control and G, which is great. However, what you can do in here as well, if you come to guides, you've got frame aspect. So you've got a choice of all the different sizes and resolutions that are possible. So if we was going to be using this on 720p, then if we click that, you can see now the guide changes to that size. Come back and we've got guide, and I'm just going to put that on the default, which is 16:9. I've got my guides, and the reason I've got my guides is I want to place this down here for the default. So I'm going to come into my global positioning, and then I'm going to go 0.8, 0.2, and then this is going to be 0.4, and it's going to sit it down here. I think what I might do is we'll leave that at 0.2, but I'll bring this over here to there, so 0.85, and I'm going to leave it at 0.4. Maybe a bit small, but this is just going to be the default. We're going to have presets to move it around the screen. Next up, before I make a macro, I just need to rename my nodes. And the reason I'm renaming the nodes is because when I get into the code, I want to understand exactly what that node is. So here, I'm just going to make this R1 actually. Let's do that as R1 for render 1, and I'll do this one as R2 for render 2. The merge, now I always have an M1 node, and the reason I've got an M1 node is because in Visual Studio Code, all my snippets, my pieces of code, are based off M1. So instead of typing them out, I can just use a snippet. This one here we're going to have as M2. Then the shadow I'm going to have as SH1. Looking at that, we've got everything set up. So now I'm ready to build my macro.